Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Solidarity Minnesota team. We'll be introducing ourselves in a little bit. But first and foremost, we wanted to welcome you and thank you for joining us in learning more about the work of the Solidarity Minnesota grants. Just a housekeeping, we wanted to let you know that we're going to have a Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. And during that time, throughout the presentation rather, I want to invite you to submit your questions or thoughts and ideas in the chat box, and we'll be able to answer your questions that way. So today, this is what our agenda looks like. We're gonna start with presenting you, introducing you rather to the presenting team, followed by introduction to Solidarity Minnesota Collaborative, the micro grants, as well as the strengths and resilience grants that we are proposing for this version of the RFP. And we'll go in deeper into the eligibility criteria and give you insights into our priorities process, as well as the application system that we are using. And then in the end, we will provide space for you to be able to ask any questions and thoughts you may have. Without further ado, we'd like to start with introductions, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Lulit.
Thank you, Wally. Good afternoon, everyone. If you joined us for the webinar that we did before, you will hear very similar things in the beginning of the webinar, and then we'll get more specific to our Strength and Resiliency grant opportunity towards the end. So my name is Lulit Molla. I am the Director of Community Impact at the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and I am honored to be working on this project and be connected with all of you during this time.
And I'm Wally Osman. I'm a Community Innovation Associate here at the Bush Foundation. And I'm also similarly excited in supporting the work of Solidarity Minnesota.
And finally, I'm Allie Larson. I'm a program manager with Greater Twin Cities United Way, and with United Way being the fiscal host of the Solidarity Minnesota Collaborative, I'm also the program manager of the Solidarity Minnesota grants. And I'll just mention too, although we'll have a Q&A at the end, we encourage all of you to be using the comments box to type in your questions during the, it's under chat on the columns at the bottom. So type in your questions as you have them so that we can kind of get through them at the end, and then we won't have to wait for people to type. But feel free to submit them at any time. We'll probably address them towards the end.
Most excellent. Thanks, Allie. So Solidarity Minnesota is a collaboration of Minnesota-based foundations aligned in our commitment to community. We're motivated by the core principles that strengthen the fabric of our society, as we are compelled to uphold values of inclusion, equity, and democracy. Solidarity Minnesota seeks to invest in the strength and resilience of leaders working around the clock to meet the unique needs of immigrant and refugee families, and to galvanize support for immigrant and refugee communities through a unified philanthropic voice. Our current focus rests on supporting immigrant and refugee communities facing a challenging and uncertain climate.
So thank you, Wally. Can you go back one more slide? Wally just gave you an overview of what Solidarity Minnesota is. And if you participated or applied for the micro grants, again, you have this information. And on the screen, you'll see participating foundations of this collaborative. And you may be a grantee partner of one or more of these foundations, or you may not be. Either way, it's fine, and it doesn't make you any more or less eligible for opportunities. And then on the next slide. So you may have applied for or received a micro grant. So that was our first phase of funding for this collaborative. We really wanted it to be a responsive style grant making to all of you organizations or individuals under fiscal sponsor in Minnesota. We had a goal and achieved a few-week turnaround around grant decisions and the disbursements of funds. So the good news is we were able to grant out $200,000 in $2,500 grants within 90 days forming the coalition. Is that right, Allie?
That is correct.
So it says 100 on here. I apologize.
Oh, it's 190, and then we upped it to an additional 100,000.
Yes, so 200 total, 100 within the first 90 days. And we received, 200 proposals from all over the state, and 40 or more grantees,
Received the additional funds.
received the additional remaining $100,000. I apologize if that was a little confusing. So most grantees were either immigrants or refugees or organizations led by immigrants or refugees. We also funded in Greater Minnesota. So I think we worked hard, and you really helped ensuring this fund was dispersed to diverse work and strategies, moving immediate needs of immigrant and refugee communities forward on a smaller scale, because the grant was on the smaller side. And next, go ahead.
Part of our strategy for the micro grants was to learn about the needs in community, and we were going to use those learnings to inform the larger Black grants that we're going to be talking to you in depth today.
Yeah, so currently the requests for proposals are open for the Strength and Resiliency Grant. So micro grants are closed, and now we are moving into Strength and Resiliency Grant opportunity. And really the purpose of the Strength and Resiliency grant opportunity is to support organizations that are working to address the urgent needs of refugee and immigrant communities. And when we say urgent needs, we mean in relations to policy or narrative around immigrants and refugees that has especially advanced in the last 9 months. So we want to support with this grant existing new temporary programs, networks, coalitions, or activities, again, in response to the heightened challenge facing immigrants and refugees. We want to be able to grow your ability to meet a demand for increased resources or services, and of course support and build people power to participate in advocacy, organizing, and civic engagement. And I think now Allie will share with us some eligibility, strategy around priorities, etc.
Yeah, so the eligibility for the Strength and Resilience Grant is the same as for the micro grant. First and foremost, let me clarify that whether or not you received a micro grant, as Lulit mentioned at the beginning, you are eligible to apply for the Strength and Resilience Grant. We are asking that you demonstrate that your 501c3 status, or as with before, that you demonstrate you are hosted by a fiscal sponsor if you don't have your own 501c3. Again, we are partnering with MAP for Nonprofits and Daniel Gangelhoff in particular at MAP for Nonprofits to facilitate the fiscal sponsor process or answer any questions you may have about that. So don't hesitate to reach out. We have her contact information on our website, on our application page, and also you can always reach out to me for that. We're also requesting that you propose the use for the grant funds which addresses the current urgency. So again, we're underscoring the urgency as we want to make sure that this is the right opportunity for you. We know it's going to be a competitive grant, and although we do our best to make the process approachable and not too lengthy of an RFP, we also want to make sure that everybody who's applying for this understands what our core priorities are and where the most competitive applications will come from. You are eligible whether or not you're an individual or an organization that received a micro grant, and whether or not you're an individual or organization that is run or led by immigrants and refugees. However, if we advance to the next slide, Wally, you'll learn that we do have a priority, as we did with the micro grants, for immigrant and refugee-led work. Our other priority is around serving Greater Minnesota, and so of course we highly encourage rural applications and hope that you will help connect this resource to your rural partners. If you aren't sure about your eligibility, or even if you have a reason to want to talk about your application, chat through some of your approaches or your questions, I'm always available. Would be pleased to receive your inquiries via email or phone. So our priorities, as I said moments ago, work led by immigrants and refugees, geographic diversity, and then the latter part of this slide gets into our priorities in terms of the type of work we're looking to fund. We do have an open and broad application, so you could be creative and tell us what work you're doing that doesn't fit in one of these areas. But from our learnings and community engagement, and also through the microgrants, we really zeroed in on these targeted activities. So that would be legal services, know your rights training, and legal advocacy, community organizing, civic engagement, and coalition network building, immigrant and refugee media, storytelling, and essentially media justice work, capacity building for immigrant and refugee-led nonprofits, and immigrant and refugee leadership development. Our available funding and grant amount is approximately $600,000. We do have some resources that are going to be siloed and separated to specifically fund DACA work, which is an invite-only opportunity at this time. But we may or may not have additional resources. Solidarity Minnesota is an emerging and strengthening collaboration, and so we do always hope to bring in the most resources possible. At this time, we're capped at the $600,000 for both the Strength and Resilience grants and for these DACA investments. We, the majority of our awarded organizations will receive grants of up to $25,000. I think probably one of the most complicated parts of this application, and the area that I've received the most questions on, is how to use this one application to apply for both a $25,000 and a $75,000 grant. These are two separate pools of funding. So it's the same bucket of money, but we will be evaluating the $75,000 applicants against one another and the $25,000 applicants against one another. The same organization can certainly apply within the same application for both of those opportunities, and indeed we hope that's the case for many of you. What I will say is with our limited resources, we're only able to make 1 to 2 of the $75,000 grants unless additional resources come our way, which would be delightful. And so those will be really competitive. I mean, you can imagine we've already got about 76 applications. I'm not sure how many are at the $75,000 level, but we'll only be able to fund 1 or 2 of them. So we're looking for larger scale statewide or collaborative efforts. Your $25,000 application could be the same project as a $75,000 application if the $75,000 application components showcase how you're really expanding the work, or it could be 2 completely different projects. The way to approach this in the application is simply to work your way through the top half of the application through the $25,000 portion. And then at the bottom, if you're also interested in being considered for one of these $75,000 grants, there'll be a button opportunity for you to indicate that you're interested. And if so, it'll pop open 3 additional questions to help us understand the impact that you would have if you were considered in the $75,000 pool. So I know that's a bit complex. I guess the other thing I would say is really don't hesitate to reach out to me by phone if you want to walk through your particular application, or if you want to just clarify any other pieces about what that means. So for our timeline, as you noted, the RFP opened on September 12th. We wanted to give at least a month for applicants to apply. We're also kind of trying to balance the urgency and community, and so we didn't want to give too much time because we wanted to move the ball along. So it will close on October 10th. November 27th through December 8th, we will be having 30-minute phone calls with about the top 40 applicants. And then in late January, our grant decisions will be announced, with early February having funds released. In the next slide, we'll be talking through our phased process for review. So in keeping with Solidarity Minnesota's commitment to community engagement and community-led decision-making and power sharing in the immigrant and refugee community, Phase 1 will involve foundation staff, but Phase 2 will not. So Phase 1 will be Solidarity Minnesota Foundation teams coming together to narrow the initial pool of applicants to about the top 40. So if we have about 120 applications, we'll bring those down to about 40 that we perceive to be the best aligned with the strategies that Solidarity Minnesota is approaching with the Strength and Resilience opportunity. And we'll go ahead and conduct 30-minute phone calls with all of those applicants just to gather more information. All of that information will be passed on to phase 2, which will be non-foundation community reviewers who will be meeting outside of the foundation team and determining their top slate of applicants for the recommended funding amount. So we anticipate that that will be about 20 final grantees, but it depends on how much, if there are a number of grantees who only apply for $5,000, obviously the total number of grantees would be higher than if everybody applied for the full 25. In phase 3, a guiding team from the Solidarity Minnesota Coalition will review and approve the Community Review Committee's funding recommendations. Just a little bit on grant reporting. We anticipate these will have an 11-month term just to help move the resources quickly into community and wrap things up by the end of 2018. If your particular project starts a little bit before February or ends a little bit after December, we can certainly work with you, so don't worry about that as a mandate. Just be sure to be open with us about your needs. And all grantees of this Strength and Resilience grant will be asked to submit a short narrative description regarding the impact of funds and lessons learned, typically due about a month or two after the grant closes. So we're thinking February of 2019. Just to walk you through a bit of an application demonstration, it's really just going to be about the process. So many of you have probably navigated your way to our Solidarity Minnesota website and then the Apply for Funding page. When you scroll down to the bottom of the Apply for Funding page, you see this screenshot that we put here on the computer, and you would click here to apply for a Strength and Resilience grant. When you navigate through the click here, that then brings you to the United Way portal, and I wanted to draw your specific attention to these two separate aspects. The first aspect is you'll need portal access. And so if you had portal access from being a United Way grantee from some other issue outside of Solidarity Minnesota, you would use that same information. Or if you had portal access because you were a Solidarity Minnesota micro grantee or micro grant applicant, you would use that same access. But you'll want to use the portal link that's in that first red circle. So once you have your portal access, you go to that link in the first red circle to begin your application. And I think that wraps up our formal presentation. As always, we try to really prioritize being accessible. I am the main point of contact, but Wally and Lulit are always happy to answer questions. I try to respond within a day at most, and usually within an hour or two if I'm in the office. We also have information always on our website, including a video about this opportunity translated in both Spanish and Somali, which may assist your community. So please don't hesitate to reach out either to myself, to any of our panelists here today, or to our IT help desk at United Way, which can help you through any of those portal application questions. So I think I'll turn it over to Wally, who's going to be monitoring a few questions that come in from you as the audience. And thank you for your time and attention today.
Yes, and actually, if you look at the drop-down options on the left side, you can submit questions under the questions heading or under the chat comments option. And so far, we have seen one question that's coming from Deborah. Our proposals for smaller grants under 10,000 also welcome? Absolutely.
So you are asked to apply for funding up to 25. It does not have to be $25,000. It could be under that.
Yep, and one of the aspects of the application asks for you to tell us kind of about your budget, how you would use the resources. So that's a really good place to let the reviewers know what you would do with different amounts of money.
And right now, we're not seeing other questions.
So we could give it some time.
Yeah, we'll go, it's 3:51. We'll stay on until at least 4.
So there's another question. Is there an opportunity to connect with others regionally through you?
Well, if by that you mean you want to connect to other organizations who are supporting immigrants and refugees in your community, that's probably information that we could pull through our network or through our microgrant list. If you mean you want to connect with other funders, we're kind of it right now.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you are asking if there's an opportunity to connect with other folks doing the work to respond to the needs of immigrants and refugees directly. And we have individuals and organizations who have applied for the micro grants. And we have also put the organizations who received money from the micro grant period phase on our website. I think something unique and further could be explored, although right now our priority is facilitating this strength and resilience grant making.
Yep, and Dee, who asked that question, feel free to reach out to me. This is Allie again. If you want to know a list of some of the organizations in your community specifically who are engaged in this work.
Again, okay, we have another question. Are there any restrictions to policy advocacy or lobbying these funds? Can we use these funds to mobilize calls to action?
You know, that's a great question, and it's one that came up with our microgrants too. I think we certainly don't want to limit applications, so the eligibility is open. Depending on kind of the advocacy that you're looking to pursue, it might be a question that the review team brings to kind of a leadership level. There aren't restrictions on these dollars, but I will say that we haven't historically funded too much in the space of lobbying. We have funded significantly in the space of kind of community organizing and advocacy, which approaches lobbying, but it's not literally paying for the lobbying.
Would you consider funding general operating or ongoing program? Absolutely, particularly under our heightened priority needs. What if the 25,000 and 75,000 are for two different programs? Are they still done in the same application?
Yep, same application so long as it's the same organization. If you're planning on a collaboration with two different partners for the two different amounts, then I'd recommend two different applications. But as long as it's one organization, the programs can come from any component of your work and could be different for the two different funding levels.
In Greater Minnesota, are you open to projects that involve the immigrant and refugee communities, among other groups needing community organizing for inclusion, immigrant and refugee as one element of the target group?
Yes, I mean, I think the intention is to be broad with our eligibility because we have limited resources and the needs are so high in the immigrant and refugee communities themselves. Our priorities will always align with funding specifically immigrant and refugee-led work, and then secondarily immigrant and refugee impact work. And so I think this is more of a matter of competitiveness of the grant rather than eligibility. So I might recommend for that type of application that you think about whether or not you could really segment and focus and specialize your work serving the immigrant and refugee community for inclusion, and really focus your application on that, and then maybe find a different funding resource for the other work that you want to do in your community, which we all agree is equally valuable. It's more a matter of where our resources are limited, so we have to prioritize.
Will you give some examples of programming services already established you would support with general operating support?
Yeah, I think a really good example for this would be work that was, for example, serving immigrant and refugee communities through legal support or know your rights trainings. If there's an organization out there that is currently supporting Know Your Rights by showing up in communities a few times a week and kind of explaining the new challenges as they present themselves for DACA recipients or for individuals who have family members who are connected to the countries impacted by the new travel ban announcements. That type of work is ongoing in community. We know it's already happening. We know it's underfunded. We'd be more than happy to support those organizations as kind of a general operating support with the emphasis on the work altogether supporting immigrants and refugees in their communities.
We're going to give folks a minute or two to ask other questions you may have. Don't be shy. Feel free to submit questions under the questions box under the drop-down options on the left side of the screen. Can you talk a little bit about the budget we are supposed to submit?
Yes, that is a great question, and actually it's one that I'm going to punt because I don't want to speak out of turn, and I'm not sure if you're referencing the budget about how you would use the resources or if there's a separate budget question. I can't remember if we included one about the budget of your organization. We definitely have a question about org budget, which is just kind of your total budget, and then we have a question about how you would use the Solidarity Minnesota resources. So please reach out to me independently if you want to talk through that. I want to make sure I get you the best information, which would probably mean I should chat with our finance team.
Funding is focused mostly on legal services or leadership development for refugees and immigrants.
I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true. Certainly the example I gave was in the legal arena or the know your rights arena, but we also have a high preference or high priority around applications in the media justice space, also in the civic engagement or community organizing space, which I don't think are necessarily related to legal and or leadership development. They may be, but our priority categories are broader than that.
Can you use the grant for general operating or project specific? Yes, and also particularly around, so if you're proposing a specific project that's needing the heightened needs of immigrant and refugee communities, certainly that can be in the form of a project or in existing programs that you're already doing by scaling up those programs to serve more. We're a bit quiet because we're waiting for questions to come in. It is 3:59 p.m. right now. 4 actually.
Well, if there are no other questions, we won't hold you. I think just to emphasize again, please don't hesitate to reach out. We know grant applications are complex and challenging, and we want our process to be as accessible as possible. So we also welcome feedback. If you want to give us feedback on this webinar or feedback on our process and how approachable you feel it is, we would welcome that as well. Oh, we just got another question.
Yep. Question from Paula. Can you use the funds for operational expenses, that's overtime for employees, qualify for use of portion of funds?
Yeah.
Yep, that's fine. Again, if it was an entire proposal based on overtime expenses, that probably just wouldn't be as competitive, even though we all believe that our nonprofits are working around the clock right now. But certainly for a portion, I think that would be appropriate. And we know that you're putting in the extra hours.
Feel free to also like Solidarity Minnesota on Facebook and follow on Twitter to stay connected to this collaboration and other updates that you may want to stay informed about. As Ali said, this won't be the only time you'll have an opportunity to inquire about questions or other things on your mind, the contact information both for Ali in terms of content and program and technology is on the screen right now. And really thank you so much for joining us on this webinar and doing the work that you all do on behalf of immigrant and refugee communities in Minnesota. And we hope to see your applications.
Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks, all. We'll also post this webinar on the website for anyone that needs to see it again. Good luck.